Hey guys, what's up, it's Alex here. Welcome back to another video. Now, I apologise for not doing the face cam in my room. I normally would, but I had another outbreak of acne and it makes me incredibly self-conscious, so I apologise for that. But I've included some R-Factor gameplay in the background, some GP3 from the Turkish track, one of my favourite tracks in the world. Anyway, hopefully enjoy that. So, in today's video we're going to be speaking about some of the greatest improvements in Formula 1 safety, and I think this is a really positive thing to look at because it's great to see how Formula 1 has evolved over the years, always listen to the drivers and the teams, and become a much safer sport because of it, but not taking away from the entertainment value. So the first thing I want to speak about is the rollover bar. This was first introduced in 1961 and obviously designed to help drivers if they ended up upside down. However, it was not as effective as it should have been, and by the late 60s, in 1968, they made sure that this was safer, so they ensured that the rollover hoop was now 5 centimeters above the driver's head, because if the rollover hoop is obviously the same height or below the driver's head, there's not too much point of it unless the driver is ducking, and I can assume that's a very hard thing to do in a Formula 1 car. So this was definitely one of the first big safety introductions to Formula 1, and still something we definitely rely on in modern day Formula 1, and of course it's got safer and safer as the years have gone on. The rollover hoop is just basically indestructible now in modern day Formula 1, and of course in other forms of motorsport as well we've seen the evolution of things like roll cages and sort of safety cells, and that's all stemmed from stuff like the rollover bar in Formula 1. So an incredible safety feature of Formula 1, and it's fantastic that it originated in this sport and they evolved it very early on and got it very safe in terms of rollovers in the early part of the Formula 1 history in the 1960s. Another thing that was developed in the 1960s was the evolution of fireproof overalls, and in 1963 drivers were required to wear fireproofs when out on track. And of course this is helping against possible injuries that could be sustained if something goes wrong with the car and it ends up on fire, as the name suggests. But this didn't just stop there, they kept evolving it. Not just drivers ended up wearing them, mechanics ended up wearing them, even people like pit lane reporters were wearing them into the 1990s, and this all just helped the safety of Formula 1, especially in the refueling era in the pit lane where lots of things could go badly wrong. But actually in the 1970s, in 1979, multiple drivers started wearing overalls with 5 layers of fireproof material, and this was the same sort of material used by NASA, which is quite incredible. So Formula 1 was going to very, very long lengths to try and make sure that the drivers were as safe as possible in the cockpits, but of course at that stage of Formula 1 the cars themselves were probably the most lethal part, and sometimes sadly even fireproofs couldn't save someone's life. So it was a good start in trying to help prevent maybe smaller injuries in Formula 1, but unfortunately it still wasn't maybe the great step forward in safety that we wanted, as cars were still inherently dangerous in the 1950s, 60s and even into the 70s and 80s. Something that you might not think of as a safety measure put into Formula 1, but it actually is when you think about it, is the introduction of flag signals in 1963. So these were introduced to help prevent further accidents when the officials realised something else was happening out on track. Now, of course, now if you see a yellow flag or a double-weight yellow flag or a red flag or even stuff like a blue flag, they're all implemented to tell you about dangers you might be seeing on track, and I suppose the mechanical warning flag and slippery surface flag, all of these were introduced to help the driver or give the driver more information so that when they're out on track they're not coming into a corner with a complete unknown. And if you see a yellow flag, or even worse, you know kind of what's going to be around the next corner, and they've obviously drummed that into the driver's head. And even though some drivers in the world of motorsport still decide to ignore these flags, they definitely are there for the benefit of the driver and the safety of the sport, because the introduction of them lets drivers know what they may be facing and tells them inherently what they should be doing around the next couple of corners. But it is sad that even to the modern day world of motorsport, some people do ignore these flags and people are still getting injured, and even worse because flag signs and all of that sort of stuff is not being adhered to as it probably should be. So whilst I think it's a great innovation for Formula 1, I do feel like maybe that these should be more strictly enforced in motorsport, because there does seem to be some circumstances in motorsport, sadly, where people just ignore these flags still, even though they're definitely there for the safety of the drivers, marshals and fans alike. So we start to skip ahead a couple of years now, and we're looking in 1992 and the introduction of the safety car. Now, this is obviously a massive thing for the Formula One safety, because the introduction of the safety car means that if there is an accident out on track, it enables the whole field to be slowed down, and the safety crews and all the other crews around the track, it gives them a much better opportunity to go and help whoever is involved in the accident, obviously, and get that accident cleared up. Because even if it is just a relatively small accident, we don't want people out on track like marshals risking their life just to get a part of a car off of the track. So something like the safety car was introduced and incredibly important since, and we'll speak about it later, how the safety car has even improved and developed into an even bigger thing. So that was something in 1992 that was very incredibly important, and 1994 saw the large amount of changes happen after the terrible deaths of Senna and Ratzenberger. So a pit lane speed limit was introduced to protect those in the pit lane. More stringent helmet and fire extinguisher laws were brought into the sport, and very importantly, 27 corners were identified as very high risk in Formula One, and they were requested and they had to be changed or removed if they wanted to stay on the Formula One calendar. Now, this was an incredibly in-depth situation here. Of course, we had the death of one of the most legendary drivers in the sport, and everyone wanted to understand why. And it looks like, well, we understand that the FIA and all of the officials realised what went wrong, and they went about it accordingly, and making sure that a lot of corners in Formula One were safer, inherently safer for drivers, was a massive step forward. Of course, it will never bring back Ayrton Senna, it will never bring back Roland Ratzenberger, but their death helped develop Formula One history. It's just sad that's the way that motorsport, I guess, has gone over the years. Unfortunately, a lot of the time we lose someone, but in losing someone we end up gaining some knowledge from that situation and improving safety. But of course, you would never want anyone to pass just to get some information of how to improve. But unfortunately, I guess that's how they learn, that's how they improve, is through the sad moments in Formula One history. In 2001, one of the most important pieces of modern day Formula One safety, the HANS device, the head and neck support system, was introduced, and in 2003 this became mandatory for all drivers. Now, of course, a lot of accidents in Formula One do intensely stress the neck, and that's where a lot of injuries in Formula One in the past have came from, is injury of the neck and the head. So the introduction of the HANS device was incredibly important in saving people's lives, and where in the past a relatively small accident could lead to a death because of the violent G-forces that were obviously being felt in the cockpit, the introduction of the HANS device started to help that. It started to reduce the shock, I guess, from stuff like whiplash. That was nowhere near as much of a sting. Of course, drivers could still come out of accidents with injuries to the neck and the head, but the HANS device was a massive improvement in helping that not be so much of a prevalent factor when an accident happened in modern day Formula One. I even remember in most recently, I think in 2016 at the Belgian Grand Prix, Kevin Magnussen had a crash at the top of Eau Rouge and he still got out, and he still was in pain, and I still remember that quite vividly, that large moment at the top of Eau Rouge. And I feel like even though the HANS device is obviously an incredible feature for Formula One, I still feel like there can be things that can be done in the hopefully next couple of years to help the head and neck, because that still does seem to be the most likely place where a driver can sadly be injured, or even worse. And if we start to look at more recent times in Formula One, since 2012 they've started to look at the reprofiling of the front wing. They are lowering it because they realised that there was maybe quite a high likelihood if there was a T-bone accident, the high front wing could do some serious damage. So they've reprofiled that since. In 2012 and 2013 there was a subtle difference, and then 2014 onwards we've had to go with a much lower front wing. But that also does bring up the question about this could end up being a ramp. The low front wings could be a ramp if a driver is spun around halfway in the middle of a track. That could provide another negative effect, so they're always trying their best to make sure this will not be a possibility. And also something that's been incredibly important in the safety of Formula One over the past years is the introduction of tethered wheels. We've seen many times in the past sort of stray wheels flying down the pit lane, flying off the track, and of course people have been seriously injured. I'm not sure about if anyone has died from it, but there definitely have been some serious injuries through cars not having tethered wheels. So the introduction of tethered wheels has been incredibly important over the past years and has definitely helped Formula 1 become a safer sport. And of course, the most recent invention to Formula 1 that's for safety is the halo. Of course, this is a very controversial topic. Everyone has a different opinion on the halo. I, at first, of course, was a bit like, okay, this doesn't look particularly great, but ever since, I haven't really noticed it. I don't particularly look at a Formula 1 car and be like, whoa, there's the halo anymore. It's just part of the car, and I don't really feel like it looks that bad. I think as Formula 1 fans, we normally hate something, don't we, when it first comes in. There are a lot of things that happen like that, and then over time we just sort of forget about it, and it's just Formula 1. So it doesn't look great, let's be perfectly honest, but in terms of its safety aspect, we've seen even a couple of times of this year already places where it might have prevented injuries, so that's very important. I can remember in Spa when there was a car flying, I think it was Alonso flying and hit Leclerc, and if the halo wasn't there, you don't know what could have happened, but there was definite contact with Alonso's car to the halo, so thank God it was there, So there's some of the top improvements in Formula 1 history. Of course, I haven't named them all. There have been so many great things that have came into Formula 1 over the past 70 years that we've been racing, and they've all been incredibly important in improving Formula 1's history, and hopefully we'll be going forward and being even safer, but at the same time being even more entertaining for fans, and that's the main thing, being safe for the drivers and being entertaining for the fans. That's what we want from Formula 1 at the end of the day. So that's it. Thank you for watching this video. Hopefully you found it interesting, and yeah, I'll see you guys around soon. Have a great day. It's been AlexZAfRo. Goodbye.